Hello. It was one of those television moments that instantly redefine pop music. 3 minutes of airtime that prompt chatter in playgrounds and supermarket queues alike. Fronting his band The Smiths, Morrissey made his Top of the Pops debut in 1983 wearing national health specs and a hearing aid. His billowing shirt was unbuttoned, he waved a bunch of gladioli, and he lurched around the BBC studio like a drunken ballerina. And then there was the voice. This charming man launched the career of the Smiths, a band which, despite existing in the public eye for less than 4 years, remains revered a quarter of a century on from that debut. Johnny Marr's intricate and inventive guitar playing may have created an often joyful sound, but the dominant image of the band was shaped by Morrissey's poetic lyrics of loss, loneliness and emotional despair. The self-confessed son and heir of a shyness that is criminally vulgar has somehow managed to thrive in an industry that he frequently professes to despise. Morrissey has gone on to record 10 successful solo albums, the most recent of which, Years of Refusal, seems to allude in its title to his attitude to publicity. And yet, this week, Morrissey arrived in the front row studio. So why the reluctance to play the game?
Well, I'm not a celebrity, and I don't want to be photographed, and I don't want to be in music magazines. I don't know whether that means that I'm private, but I get confused by the fact that simply because you make music, that you then naturally have to follow all these typical paths of exposure, most of which I don't understand. But yes, I'm private to a degree.
But many writers would say, just because I write in the first person and I write what sound like candid confessionals, that doesn't mean that those songs are about me. I'm creating characters, I'm creating narratives.
Well, that's also true. That's also true. I mean, you can say I, but what you really mean is we. But my feeling is that if I feel something very strongly in any direction, then perhaps other people do too, so therefore it's worth recording.
If somebody said the songs are autobiographical, would you deny that, or is it just that there is an element of autobiography?
Well, the life I lead is very autobiographical. I mean, this is me here, sitting now, speaking to you, and slamming things down onto tape is quite something to do.
Words, emotions.
Yes. I mean, the singing voice is very revealing anyway. It tells a great deal about anybody. As soon as a person starts singing, you can see right into their soul, or you can see that they don't have a soul, or you can see they have nothing to say, or they have so much to say. So I think in the first place to sing is an extraordinary thing and very revealing. This is why I think so many people, when they're asked to sing, they just cannot. It's you know, you may as well ask them to fly. They can't sing in public in front of people because it's it's stripping everything down, and it's showing people something that perhaps shouldn't be seen.
There's a great line in the Smiths song "The Queen is Dead" when the scenario is the character, and possibly the character is you, has broken into Buckingham Palace, is sitting on the edge of the Queen's bed, and she says, I know you, and you cannot sing. And you say, that's nothing, you should hear me play piano. And you're talking about being a musician there and singing. Can you remember the first time that you did sing, or the first time you realised that you could sing?
Yes, I can. Well, I don't recall the first time that I thought I could sing, but I always did sing as a very, very small child. And I bought music from a very early age, from the age of 6, which is very early. And there was a record shop called Paul Marsh on a road in Moss Side, which was near where we lived in Manchester. And I was obsessed as a very small child with this record shop. And my memory is that it had sawdust on the floor. And I would examine every single record that was racked or in boxes. And I was just absolutely transported somewhere else. And I never left that place, to be honest.
And did you find the music only in there, or was there music playing at home as well?
There was music playing at home because I had very young aunts who were obsessed with music. And my parents were young parents.
And this was rock and roll at the time, or pop music?
It was pop music in the mid-60s. And we listened to everything. and it was constantly pop music.
So when you take yourself back to that record shop and you're piling through the sleeves and listening to this, were you singing along? Was there an immediate connection
Completely.
then? And you thought, I could do this?
Yes, I thought I could. And I would imitate the last few lines of You've Lost That Loving Feeling, the Righteous Brothers, their duet, their call and answer thing. And I would go insane at the age of 6 and 7. And I knew even then that I wanted to sing. And, of course, I knew I perhaps wouldn't be an opera singer. I simply loved pop music. And I thought it was the most beautiful form of expressing any kind of emotion. When it works, of course. It could be a load of tripe, depending upon what the person's saying. I think when people in pop music sing songs that affect you, that you fall in love with them slightly. You fall in love with a component. And I don't mean physically you want to jump on top of them or anything like that, but they stay with you forever. It's very, very, very powerful. And I think this is possibly why many people are slightly frightened of pop music, because it's so powerful and unrestrained. And
if it had that impact on you at that young age, what song would it be? Would it be a particular song or a particular sound? Was it Motown or was it British pop?
It was British pop and it was Motown.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was. Yeah. Yes. Or the fantastic songs of the day, of the mid-'60s and the late 60s. I loved groups like the Foundations and... but really now, when you look back on the 1960s and you see the top 30 of any given week of any year, it's very powerful. And the songs are very, very powerful, which isn't the case today. But I think that the 1960s was the right time to be listening to pop music.
You've written in a song about being shy.
Yeah.
Were you shy as a child?
I wasn't shy as a child. No, I was very gregarious, and I was very outgoing, and I was very talkative. But I became very shy as a teenager because I became immersed in vegetarianism, and I became very depressed by the existence of the abattoir. And I know this can sound very, very silly to people, but I had a dawning when I was 11 and 12 that how could such places possibly exist? And just the realization that the things that people did to animals really depressed me.
Was there an abattoir nearby?
They're bound to be. I mean, how could there not be?
So you didn't have a physical experience when you were repulsed by a smell or a sight? Or
just
something?
The knowledge that such places existed.
Did somebody explain it to you then? I mean, how did...
I saw a television documentary by accident when I was 11, and I was absolutely horrified. I could not believe it. I could not believe that such places would be allowed to exist. And of course they still do. Yeah. But I think it had such a profound effect upon me as a teenager that it made me very, very introverted. Because I felt I was on an alien planet. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand how people could take small lambs and kill them and eat them. It's incomprehensible. It's beautiful, the future must die.
Did you have pets at home?
Always, yes.
A lot of them?
A lot of cats,
dogs, cats,
yes.
Right.
Yes, always. But a great compassion for animals, always.
So you were gregarious, and you could perform, and you say you realised you wanted to sing. When was the first time you did sing? Was there a public debut?
There were several times in my late teens when I tried to form groups, and there would be rehearsal periods, and it would never quite work because I was still very inhibited. And
you discovered the New York Dolls by this time, then?
Oh, yes, much earlier on. But I saw them as being very aggressively confident, which I wasn't. So I didn't ever look at them and think, oh, I must be like that. We were planets apart. So I couldn't quite see where I could possibly fit into music, because it seemed to me that all the people who sang were very aggressive. But then again, all the people who sang and who were folksy and very gentle didn't appeal to me. So, where did I belong? which soil could I grow from? That was the question, and it still hasn't been answered.
And was there an answer suggested by poetry then? Because you did bring a poetic slant to popular music in the 80s, and people said this is a new approach, and it was always, right from the beginning, it was a very literate approach to pop music.
I think it became important to me to introduce new words and to say something different. The world did not need another group, another singer who simply said the same thing. So I was very anxious that I would appear to be at very, very least, saying something different in a different way. And that was achieved.
I dread it's sunny days, so I'll meet you at the cemetery gates. Keats and Yeats are on your side.
And that was thanks to poetry as well. I mean, there's a song, Cemetery Gates, and you talk about Keats and Yeats. And
yes.
Wilde is on my side. Wilde is still on your side. You still take inspiration from poetry, do you?
Well, yes. I took great inspiration from poetry, and I felt that people who made pop music were really considered to be the new poets in any case, because I don't think by the late 70s and certainly by the 80s that people were really that interested in going out to buy poetry books. They just didn't really do it anymore. Young people didn't do it anymore, as far as I could tell. So I felt that the new poetry was in pop music and expression through pop music.
Did you write those songs as poems, the first songs that you wrote?
Yes.
So you sat them down and they were to be read on paper or to be read aloud?
Yes. Well, if you had to read them aloud, yes. if you were forced to.
Did you foresee a possible career as a poet? Could you ever imagine them being read aloud or read by other people in anthologies?
I always felt that the strongest form of expression was to have your own words, but not simply to recite them yourself, but to sing them yourself, and to sing them without any instruments in the way. I thought that was the strongest mode of expression. And it's all very well being a poet and not being seen and hiding away in your semi-detached house in Leytonstone or wherever you live. But the gratification, I thought, was standing in front of people and forcing them to accept you or take your life on board. And that was initially very exciting because that happened straight away.
And that happened also because the words were set to music, do you think? Is
Yes.
that because the music provided a vehicle?
Yes.
It's interesting, your former partner Johnny Marr on this programme a couple of years ago was telling me about the way those songs were written, and he talked about conceiving pop symphonies in his head, which you brought words to, and they were very much two very different elements that somehow gelled together, and that's how you arrived at that unique sound,
Yes.
the Smith sound.
That's absolutely right.
There's a club and you go home and you cry and you want to die.
I knew at the time that if I attempted to sing with musicians who are very poetic and slightly effete, it would be useless. It had to be a very, very muscular sound, because then it's confrontational and people can't really avoid you. So it had to be an assault from the very beginning.
And to bring you back 2 years of refusal to the current album, is that still the approach? Do you still go into this? Really? So you go into the studio with a set of lyrics and notebooks,
Yes.
and then you work with a band who have an even more muscular sound than the one that the Smiths had.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And for me, it's still the same approach. And foremost, it's an attempt to get people's attention. And I think you do that best with a very strong sound, a very muscular sound, as you put it, and aggression even, because why not be aggressive?
Now this might surprise you, but I find
And let me just bring you back to the theme of the album, because you say there is always an element of autobiography, but what you want us to read something of ourselves in the lyrics. But I suppose the overriding theme that seems to emerge is betrayal and bitterness and vengeance. It is a dark album lyrically, isn't it?
I think that's modern life, really. I think that's how we all live.
because you have been almost caricatured in the past by having a bleak outlook on life, but you think you're tapping into something that is shared by all of us.
I think it's how we all live. I think we all carry loneliness around with us, and I think we all carry great frustrations around with us, and I think we're all taught or led to believe that we shouldn't really talk about these things, and I get great gratification from talking about them, especially at parties and funerals. I don't ever sit down and think of some great fancy theme. I just follow my heart, really.
And is it a heart that has been broken on this album? Is it an album about betrayal and loss?
Yes, but that's, in a sense, how it's always been, really, I think.
Is pop music instinctive for you, then? I mean,
yes, it is.
You don't sit down and map it out?
No, and there are people like me, and which is why I continue and why I feel joy when I make music, because even though I get heavily criticised and the reviews are really always predictably dreadful, I know there are a lot of people like me who love music, but who can't stand the way music is constantly presented. And they can't stand the mainstream, and they can't stand all the dreadful people who become popular and clog up the airways and so forth. But nonetheless, people like me, we love music more than anybody else, but we like to be treated in an intellectual way.
And in fact, on the similar theme, we mentioned Johnny Marr. He's now, of course, Professor Johnny Marr.
Yes.
Teaching popular music as a visiting lecturer at Salford University. Could you see yourself doing a similar thing?
Oh, well, I don't think so. No, I've been offered a few similar things and I've turned them down. I
was surprised when I spoke to Johnny about his professorship, and I said, you know, when you were starting out, when you were first sitting in a bedroom with Morrissey working on those records, on those songs, they weren't even records at the time, if there had been such a thing as a local visiting professor, a university that was teaching pop music, would you have signed up? And he said, and I was surprised, he said, oh yes, absolutely.
I think he probably would have bottled the professor, really, if my memory serves me correct. But that's okay, we're living in a different world now.
Now, it is, of course, that time in the interview when I am required to ask the prerequisite question, Smiths reunion.
Well, I don't really know what the question is.
Would it ever happen?
I really don't think. I become baffled by the number of people who ask me the question. And,
but you know why it is asked time and time again? Because the group was so loved, and because it existed for that perfect few years.
Yes, and
then ended, and some people were bereft. People loved the group so much they wanted more.
Well, I think we're all bereft, and we just have to get used to the fact that things do end, and groups go, and artists go, and we all die, and that's life, really, and things move on. I'm not that person. I am not that person, so I can't imagine pretending to be that person or pretending to slot in that way as the singer of the Smiths anymore. I'm continents away from that, and that's not to slur anybody or to put anybody down or to slam the piano lid on anybody's fingers, but I'm a different person.
Do you have fond memories of being in the Smiths?
Very fond memories, yes. There are some horrendous black clouds, but for the most part the making of the music was constant and rapid, and we were a law unto ourselves. And even though we didn't get airplay and all the usual complaints, there was always victories every few months. There were great victories, and that was hugely pleasing.
Is it frustrating ever? Because you have been, if we look at the records that you've released and the chart positions, you've been, on paper, more successful as a solo artist than you ever were with the Smiths. Does it frustrate you ever that people will always tie you up in that box mark, the Smiths?
Well, it's not
let you, refuse to let you out.
Well, it's not a question that it frustrates me, because I'm very proud of that. But I get frustrated when I give press interviews and in print it just emerges with a massive Smiths photos and so forth, because my life has moved on, and the solo recordings I've made, I think, are worthy of discussion and examination. But a lot of people don't do it or won't do it. They simply want to talk about The Queen is Dead. And at the time of the Smiths, a lot of people in the media were not interested, and we couldn't get arrested on radio. So there are frustrations now. I do feel frustrated when people simply look back and think it was a great blaze of success and you were enormously loved and so forth. That isn't quite the case.
And part of the reason why you were overlooked at the time, part of the reason why the Smiths were unfashionable, was the Englishness, wasn't it?
Yes,
and
it was.
you still retain that fascination clearly through the lyrics on the solo albums. You still retain that fascination with a certain aspect of English life. And I'm just interested because it seems that you don't want to go back to Smiths because it's about nostalgia, it would be about going backward, and yet there's a part of your fascination for England seems to be nostalgic.
Well, yes it is. Yes, it is. And how could it not be? I think it is with everybody. Yeah.
But you haven't lived in this country for a while, have you? Is that nostalgia heightened because you lived in LA for a while and spent some time in Rome?
No, it isn't. No. I do have quite a broad view of things. I see just so much frustration in modern England now, and I see nothing but taxation, and I see a government that never listens to the people, the usual thing. So it's very, very difficult to examine modern life and think it's a wonderful thing for people.
You say taxation.
People are taxed constantly in this country.
Is that part of the reason why you left the country then?
Well, I mean small taxes as well as large taxes.
You were just talking about your own status.
Yeah, no.
Right.
It just seems that for any reason people are charged for whether it's sticking their rubbish out. I mean, it's illegal to have a car, it's illegal to drive, speed cameras and so forth. Everything is about making money off the back of people now, and I find that very depressing, and it's a very British thing.
Is it not the Western world? Is that not Los Angeles where you spend a lot of your time?
No.
Right.
No, it's much easier there. But here it's just simply about squeezing people dry, and I find that very difficult to come to terms with.
Have you said goodbye to England then? Would you ever return? Because you're not living in any particular country at the moment.
I actually don't live
a global wanderer.
I don't live on this planet. I occupy a very strange sphere. I don't know where I live. I just live on an aircraft.
But you're spending a lot of time then in hotels rather than in
Yes.
a base in a home.
Yes, I do.
But that must be a strange, rootless existence.
Well,
for
when
somebody who had, again, I mean, I don't want to bring it back to the Smiths all the time, but it was about roots, it was about communities, and it was about...
I think most people who live in houses feel completely rootless. So nobody wins.
So that doesn't worry you?
Not really.
What about the sense of pop music? Because you talk about that connection you had when you were, 6, 7 years old in a record shop, and that
Yes.
almost visceral,
Yes.
which roots and takes you, you think about those records, it takes you back to that time and that place. Pop music now is about the eternal now, isn't it? YouTube, you can Google everything. The Smiths exist as much today as they did in 1984. Do you look at your past at all, or do you Google yourself and...
That's a very personal question. No, I do not Google myself. I'm not that interested. I mean, I am me. So I wake up as me, and I live through the day as me, so I don't have any need to sit down and Google me.
You don't have any interest in the way that you are perceived by other
Not
people?
really, because I imagine that's completely horrific, and thankfully other people's views don't really matter to me. Is that shocking?
Shocking, surprising, possibly, because you have talked about being hurt by the press very often, because you feel that the press give you the British press in particular, give you a rough ride, don't you?
Well, it's only the British press. It's not anywhere else.
Why do you think that is?
I think it is because they don't like me. Or perhaps it's because they think I'm snooty. Or perhaps it's because I don't want to be interviewed by them and I refuse to be on the cover of their magazine, so they think, how dare you? Everybody wants to be on the cover of our magazine. How dare you say no to us? We shall give you a 1-star review when your album is released, and they do. So I think people think I'm very snooty, but I just don't feel I belong to the world of music magazines and the Brit Awards and all those dreadful things.
You've never been offered a Brit Award, have you?
No.
Why?
Because I'm credible. I don't know.
Or is it that they have offered it to you and you've said quietly, no thanks?
No,
but if they did...
I think I'm the only person in British music who hasn't been offered a Brit Award.
This interview will be broadcast on Wednesday evening, so in effect the Brit Awards are tonight. So the Brit Awards phone you up and say, lifetime achievement, Morrissey.
No, I don't think they care. I'm sure they've considered me, and I don't think they care. I don't think they care, really.
So you'd be reluctant to come back to Britain because there are aspects of British life that you don't like, and let me just bring you on to something that you've written about in song, and the idea of racism and immigration and multiculturalism. It's a subject that has been controversial as well. Yeah. And I know there is legal action with the British music...
With the NME,
still ongoing because of the way that you were reported. Again, I mean, song titles, even Bengalis in Platforms, National Front Disco, Irish Blood, English Heart. Can you just clarify your thoughts on the subject? Why do you keep returning to the idea of who we are, what England is, in that way?
Well, John Betjeman did repeatedly in 75,000 poems, and I don't think he was lambasted. I think how I explain this doesn't really matter, but I don't think anybody else on the planet has ever remotely thought I was racist. And I'm not, and I couldn't be. I mean, whatever the opposite to racist is, that's what I am. So it's very, very unfortunate and quite heartbreaking. But as for national identity, personal identity, it's nothing new, I don't think, to sing about.
It's a significant year for you, a milestone year. You're 50 in May. Do you attach special significance to the birthday?
Well, it's very surprising to me. I didn't think it would be possible, but I'm proving that it is possible. In a way, it's astonishing. But then, after you think, well, it's astonishing, you go back to your usual mode of thinking, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. There's so many people who don't make it to 20. There's so many people who don't make it to 10. So there's nothing to complain about.
You're not daunted by it?
No,
right?
Not at all, not at all. I do feel older better, and I always have felt that. And I don't feel, what a shame I'm not a teenager anymore, because when I was a teenager, I was in constant agony. So the further away I get from that period is a blessing. It really is.
But there must be a connection to that teenager, because in effect you're doing the same job. But the job is easier then, is it? Because you're not in the same teenage agonies.
Well, I think when you're a teenager, or when you are young, that people do pick on you and push you around. I mean, that sounds like a simple statement, but it's very, very true. And the older you get, people do that less and less and less. So that's quite gratifying.
But you feel a significantly different person?
Significantly, yes.
A happier person?
Absolutely, yes. But then you must consider how dreadful I was when I was a teenager. I mean, I was scraping life's pavement for many, many years. So perhaps what I've said doesn't really mean that much.
Morrissey, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks so much.